All right, in this video we're going to look at numerical measures and the 5-number summary, as well as how to make box plots. And we're going to start with the mean. The mean is the term we use for just the average, the mathematical average. And for right now, the symbol we are going to use is an X with a line over it, which we call X bar. We will actually use some other symbols for the mean later as well, depending on the situation. But the key to remember right now is X bar is when your mean is for a sample. And right now we're going to assume we're dealing with all samples. Technically, these are the formulas for it, either taking all the numbers and adding them up and dividing by the number of numbers, or this is called summation notation. You may have seen it before. Depending on how far you go in math, you will probably see it at some point. Maybe in geometry you see it. But anyway, so this is just normal mathematical average, but we call it the mean, and our symbol we use is X bar. Another way we can measure the center or the typical value in a set of data is the median. And the median is the center value. And I mentioned this in that CUS video as well. But the median is the number that's exactly in the middle of your numbers. If you have an even number of observations, so if you have an even number of numbers, then you take the two that are in the exact middle and you just average them. If you have an odd number of numbers, then it is just the one that's in the absolute middle. Or it's defined as the midpoint. The first quartile is like the midpoint of the values below the median. So it's really like the median of the lower half. The third quartile is like the median of the upper half of the data. And they're called quartiles because they are a quarter of the way through the data. The first quartile is 1/4 of the way through your data when you go from the low end to the high end. The third quartile is 3/4 of the way through as you go from the low end to the high end. And you could call the median quartile 2. We usually stick with the median, but the median is technically Q2. It's 2/4 of the way through or exactly halfway through. The range, which we've also mentioned a little bit, is always max minus min, largest value minus smallest value. And then there's something called the interquartile range, which is where you take Q3 minus Q1. And that is a measure of spread of the middle 50% of the data. We use this sometimes because if you have outliers on either end of your data, those outliers might kind of be misleading in terms of where most of your values are. So using the IQR tells you exactly where the middle kind of chunk of your data, the middle 50% is. And then the 5-number summary is kind of the quick name for the collection of values that are the min, Q1, median, Q3, and max. Or it's kind of like the minimum is the 0th percentile. Q1 is the 25th percentile, median is the 50th percentile, Q3 is the 75th percentile, and the max is like the 100th percentile because 100% of the points are at or below the max. So one of the things we use is, besides just using them to describe where things are, one of the things we use the 5-number summary for is making box plots. So to create a box plot for a set of data with no outliers, and we'll look at the other situations in a minute, but if you have no outliers, we just plot the values of a 5-number summary with an axis and scale labeled. One thing to note, people make this mistake or sometimes misleading choices or are misled by choices on multiple choice questions. The mean is nowhere on a box plot. Box plot is all about the 5-number summary and the median and the quartiles. Also, make sure when you are drawing a box plot that you include a scale underneath. And that scale needs to be like evenly spaced numbers, like counting by 2s or 5s or 10s or 20s. You can't just mark the 5-number summary values, like where those 5 points of the box are, and be done with it. So let's talk about how to get the 5-number summary and actually the mean, although we don't use it on a box plot. But if you hit stat and hit enter and go in and type all your numbers in, which I've already done, to get the 5-number summary, once your numbers are in there, clear out to a blank screen, so hit second mode, and then we want to do stat, arrow over to calc, and we want one variable stat. So we have one list of numbers, we only have one variable, and we want to get the statistics for those. Now, some of your calculators will pop into a menu like this, and our data is in list 1, unless you put yours somewhere else. By the way, if you're missing a list, come talk to me. I can show you how to fix it. It's pretty easy. Frequency list, we are not going to worry about now. There is about halfway through the year, there's a time when we might put something here, but right now we want it blank. And then just hit enter for calculate. Those of you who don't, hop right to that menu. When you do stat calc and hit enter, you're going to have one var stats pop up just in a screen like this. You just need to hit second 1 to tell the calculator what list you want to calculate the values for. X bar is right at the top. That is our mean. The 5-number summary, though, you just need to scroll down. And if you ever try and scroll down and it won't, sometimes that happens if you accidentally tap a button after you do the one var stats thing, just run it again. But in this case, my min, Q1, median, Q3, and max are 32, 46, 53.5, 58, and 64. So now I can plot those to make my graph. Now that I know my min and my max, it's a little bit easier to pick the scale of my graph. I want to go somewhere below 32 and somewhere above 64. So I decided to start at 30 and just count by 5s. And then count by 5s till I go past 64. Then I can get everything on there. And then we're really just plotting those values. Now when you plot them, the min just gets like a little like dash almost, same with the max. And then the quartiles and the median get longer lines, vertical lines. And then those quartiles get connected in a box. So like this box in the middle, sometimes people call the IQR box because it is showing you where Q1 to Q3 is a little more visually. Sometimes these graphs are called box and whiskers because you draw the box, and then the min and the max are where your whiskers are. One of the nice things about your calculator is your calculator actually makes box plots really, really easily. So once your data's in there like mine is, if you go to second y equals and hit enter, and if you go into your graphs, now the thing that's weird about the TI calculators, if you have an older one like this one is programmed to be, you can't arrow down to that second row. You have to arrow to the right. So just arrow to the right. And then there's actually 2 that look like box plots. We will never use this one here, the 5th one, or the one in the middle in the bottom row. We will always use the one that has the extra little dots there because that means the calculator will figure out outliers for you. For right now, don't worry about how to get them. We're going to do that in the next video. And then my data is in list 1, so I'm good to go. Now, hit second mode. If you just hit graph, you may or may not see your box plot. If you were on a standard window before, we wouldn't see it at all. So the nice thing is when you're making a box plot is the calculator, if you hit zoom and then either scroll down to 9 or you can just hit the number 9, there is a zoom that specifically lines up with the data that's in our stat editor. So if you just hit zoom and then the number 9, it'll automatically fix your window so you can see your whole box plot. And the nice thing about this is if you hit trace, you can actually have the calculator spit out those values for you. So you really could you wouldn't have to do one var stats if you're just making a box plot. You should know how to do it because there are going to be other things we need from there. But then you could just look at this, hit trace and arrow around and figure out how you want to set up your scale on your graph and then draw it. All right, sometimes we have outliers, and we'll talk in another video, as I said, about how to get outliers, but if a set of data has an outlier or several outliers, then they should be plotted separately, and the tails/whiskers extend to the next furthest point. So let's look at this example. For the data set below, 22 is considered an outlier, so we are going to plot 22 separately right off the bat. Then I am going to use my 5-number summary. I have the min, Q1, median, Q3, max. I had it all laid out ahead of time just to save us a little bit of time. And the max is still going to be where my high end is. Q3, median, and Q1 are still where my box is going to be. But now my tail doesn't go all the way to 22, which normally it would be the min, or it is the min, but it's an outlier. So the lower end of my tail just goes to the next biggest number. Okay? And the next biggest number in the list would be 38. So there's my box plot. There's my max, Q3, median, Q1. Not the min, but the next biggest number since the min is an outlier. And if you have 2 outliers, it's a very similar idea. So 24 and 62 are both outliers. So I'm going to plot those separately. And now I still have my IQR box that goes from 41 to 48 with 45 in the middle. But now my lower whisker goes to 36 because that's the next lowest besides my outlier. and my upper end will go to 48 because that's my next, I guess, smallest. Now the catch is, the next biggest one is 48. That's also where my Q3 is. So it's almost like the whisker is smashed so small that it's right on top of itself. This doesn't happen often, but I wanted to make sure we talk about one. If your next biggest number is the same as your Q3, there's just no whisker on that end. Same could happen on the low end too. So that would be how you draw box plots for no outliers, one outlier, a couple outliers, or even if there is no whisker at all.